Alright guys, it's your boy Shades and Trades here with a video here for beginners. For beginners, how to trade earnings, at least how I do it, and finding patterns within earnings for your specific stock. So Microsoft at 409.45, it has earnings tomorrow after close. And here's the thing, if you're gonna buy calls, it's probably your best bet. Now, how do I know that's my best bet? Well, the first thing I look at is let's go and look at Microsoft and see how it likes to behave price action wise after an earnings. So let's look at this bear market here. This is a bear market. Here's your bull market. Let's see how how the stock performs on earnings depending on the trend, the overall trend. So if we look at this bear market here on earnings, it actually gapped up. Here it gapped up on earnings as well. Here gapped up and ran, big green candle. Small gap, not a big, huge, enormous gap, but a gap nonetheless. And here is an instance where it gapped down. So let's change that to red. And down. Okay, so in the bear market, out of the four earnings that we had, three times or 75% of the time we had a gap up and it ran. One time it gapped down. Now let's look at a bull market. Let's look at a bull market here. I'm not going to count this one because it's kind of like in between. You know, it's kind of like at that point where it's not in a bull market or bear market. It's kind of it's starting to reverse here, so I don't want to count it, although I am tempted. But if we look here, gap up on earnings. So overall, even here it gapped. Did it gap up or down in here? Let's count that one. Screw it. But here it gapped down, but it still came back up. That's what's funny. So we have two gap downs and five gap ups. So since 2022, 5 out of 7 times we had a gap up. Okay, so what does that tell us? It tells us, hey, it wouldn't be a bad idea to buy calls for earnings if you're one of those people who want to play the 50-50. Doesn't seem like a bad idea. Might be actually a very good idea to buy calls on earnings. Might actually work out for you. Now, what's the next thing we need to look at? We need to look at how much of a move does it make. So we go back in time, of course, and here you see it gapped up from 288 to 296. So an $8 move. And then it still went up as high as 308. So it made an $8 gap up, but it still moved another it moved another $10. Yeah, it moved another $10 on top of that before closing lower in red. Okay, so here it gapped up from a low of 270 and it gapped up to 281. So $11 move. Here, 251 to 261. So what does that tell us? $10 move. So we're getting about an $8 to $10 move on every gap up. On the gap down, we actually moved from 246 to it's a $16 move down here. Here we moved down $12. Here on this earnings, we gapped up 275 to 294, so a $19 move. And here we gapped up from 330 to 340, so $10, but it still moved an extra 5 during the day. So now we know that the stock likes to gap up about $8 to $20. Pretty wide range. But look, 5 out of 7 times, this thing loves to gap up $8 to $20. So if you can afford calls on Microsoft, that's the way to go. because the odds are in your favor technically. And we're just basing this off of the most recent history. Obviously, we're going off of 2022, 2023. So that is how I do earnings. This is how you find patterns in earnings. You look for how many times does it gap up versus gap down, and how much of a per dollar move does it make uh, if it beats on earnings more than anything, because you're probably looking to make money to the upside unless you're buying puts. But if you're buying puts, then you're betting this is going to tank on earnings, but the odds aren't in your favor because, again, 5 out of 7 times it gaps up. So would you rather take calls or puts? That's on you. I would go with calls, at least for this earnings. And that's how you do it. That's how I do it. I don't know how other people do it, but I mean, you could do the same for Netflix. You can do this with any stock. With Netflix, if Netflix has good earnings, it loves to gap up and run. So it's not a bad idea to play calls at open or on dips, buy calls Monday on crossover. And yeah, look at this gap up here. Huge gap up, huge gap up, huge gap down. But this tells us that, boy, does this thing love to move like $50 at a time. Here it gaps down a little bit. So here's a gap up, gap up. So in the past couple of years, we've had almost an equal amount of gap ups and gap downs on Netflix. So it's genuinely a 50-50, right? But those gaps are pretty big. I mean, here it gapped from 493, 536, so almost $50. That's still quite a gap. I mean, it gapped up almost $50, but it still ran from 537 to 562. So it moved over $50 over the course of the entire day, if we're not including just the gap. And this is the kind of research you have to do if you're going to play earnings. So this is more for beginners. I'm sure some of you already know this. Some of you might not. Some of you are like, whoa, holy shit, I never thought of it like that. So yeah, it's just about finding the best odds. Anyways, that's not. There's more to it than that. I mean, you sure you could dig a little deeper and do research into the company, because sometimes on earnings a stock will beat. It will beat, but it'll still tank. So that's kind of another thing you have to take into consideration. But that's a whole nother thing. I don't want to get into that. I just want to keep it simple for beginners. So just look. I don't know. It depends, I guess, on what stock trading platform you use. But I can click here on earnings, and it shows me what days they had earnings, and I can see how much of a move it made and how many gaps ups or gap downs it's done over the course of its existence. And you can just come up with your odds. Like, is it 5 to 7 in your favor, or is it 3 to 7 in the favor of puts? That's on you. That's how I break it down. Because it is technically people think of it as a 50-50, right? Like either it's going to go up or it's going to go down. So do I buy calls or puts? Do I go long or do I go short? But you can definitely do some research and try to find and see if which of these big boy stocks have the best risk to reward ratio. All right, guys. Yeah, calls on Microsoft is not a bad way to go.